Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele. Welcome to another episode of the Bottom Up podcast. I have here with me today co-host attorney Kristen Hardy.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic that I believe is important and one that, Kristen, you and I have spoken about at length, which is what it means to be, what it means to be an entrepreneurial attorney and why it's important for young attorneys very early on in their careers to adopt this mindset. And we have a guest, someone who I and yourself, we know, we went to law school with him.
We did.
And I think has a very peculiar and interesting story as to how he's been able to find his own path within the law. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce attorney Alex Eichhorn.
Well, hello, and thank you both very much for having me today.
All right, Alex, I don't think I'm going to do your background justice. We're also friends, so if I tell the story of you, I may say some things I don't need to say, so I'll let you handle.
Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. My name's Alex Eichhorn. I'm a partner with Tabek Law, and I've been a partner with Tabek Law since 2016. I initially joined the law firm in 2013, and at the time, Fred Tabek was the sole partner and sole owner. I joined on as the sixth employee. At the time, there was no website, very limited use of technology. And quite quickly, I was able to come in and gain Fred Tabek's trust, kind of had some insight along with my partner, now partner, Jim Brzezinski and Lawrence Werlein, as to how we could leverage technology to grow in an area where there was a slight void. So rather quickly, and certainly prior to being a partner, I think it kind of alludes to what Emil was talking about, I was able to persuade to some extent Fred Tabek to trust me to take on some responsibility with marketing and with client acquisition and kind of even hiring. So one of the first things we did was get a website on a platform that allowed some customization. It was even prior to the WordPress existing. This is back in 2013. So
prior to that, there was no website?
Yeah, there's no website. So we did fortunately have the domain name Tabek Attorneys at the time, which, as it turns out, longevity of domain name is one of the crucial elements to SEO. So we had this long-term domain name. We got this website up and running, and Fred was willing to put some money into the firm to start gathering and acquiring more clients. And with that, from there, we were able to leverage technology in the form of a different CRM on an intake system that allowed for a ton of automation.
So let me take a step back. I always take steps back.
Every time.
It's my favorite phrase, apparently. In a profession where the creaking weight of expectations reign supreme, or in the creaking weight of just conservative traditions, folks aren't often afforded the opportunity to carve their own path, especially young lawyers. How did you do this? So, give me the story from law school. You graduate from law school. What's the first job you have? How'd you come about that first job?
Yeah, so I started working initially with Gruber Law Offices, and I had a brief stint with another law firm prior to that, but really my first legal experience was at Gruber Law Offices, where it was maybe not as involved as I would have liked. It's a large firm. You're kind of put in the back room to some extent work on demands on personal injury cases, but more than that, just doing medical record reviews and stuff. I realized that maybe a transition from there to a different law firm where I could get a little bit more hands-on experience was going to be beneficial. So that's when I transitioned to Tabek Law, and I did that about 8 months prior to graduating law school. And there was definitely a high hope without a guarantee of a lawyer position once I became a lawyer, which at the time the market wasn't quite as good as it is today. So I remember definitely thinking like, holy man, I'm going to come out of law school and I'm going to have to tell my parents I can't even get a job. So like securing a job was definitely quite important for me. From there, and I think it comes down to personalities. Like Fred and I certainly aligned. He's a very jovial and fun-loving kind of guy that I think one of his strong suits always has been that he identifies that he may not be the best at everything, but there's someone out there that may be better at it than him, and he's very trustworthy, and I'm very trusting in identifying that person and then entrusting them with the responsibility to actually make the change that he hopes they could. So I think, realizing that Fred was this person that would allot me the opportunity to do things that maybe I thought we could do, and maybe at the time my ideals were a little grandiose or whatever it may be, but as it turns out, we did ultimately take these ideas and move them into fruition. So for me and persuading Fred, I really had to put it in like a dollar figure. Like, here's the average case value of cases we're bringing in right now. We're making, let's call it whatever it may be, $2,000 on an SSD client. And we're bringing in 10 clients a month currently. Okay, so maybe 20 grand in revenue. What if the market has 1 million potential new signees for SSD on an annual basis. So if we're signing, even 1,000, it's such a microscopic amount. It's such a limited amount of the overall pool. I think it was realistic to start doing that. And by saying, hey, Fred, if we sign, 200-300 clients a month, 300 times 2,000, $600K in revenue on a monthly basis. It's not that unrealistic. We can do this. And quite quickly, we were able to determine that it was not that unrealistic, that there was a void in the market at the time for competent and very capable attorneys to handle people's claims. So we went from signing, 40, 50 clients a month to 5, 6, 7, 800 clients a month. Wow. And that was really done by leveraging technology.
Thank you, Alex. And you're talking a lot about the business, and that's kind of what this is about. But I do want to level set because I don't have my own firm. I'm not a partner. I don't work in private practice. And anyone who's listening, I want to make sure that you understand, what we mean by the entrepreneurship of law, of the practice of law. But even before I say that, today you may hear cars in the background because we are at the Milwaukee Bar Association, the State Bar, all of our lovely staff. They were so gracious enough to drive down here in Milwaukee. So shout out to Sarah Martis, our executive director. Emil and I both hold positions with the Milwaukee Bar Association, and I think that is part of the entrepreneurship of law, right?
Yes.
Building whatever your brand, whoever you are. So Alex, you talk a lot about, you came in, you're not even talking about practicing, right? You came in and you said, this is something that we're missing, right? This firm could do a lot better if they had these tools, this technology, and that's the value of young lawyers. But how can we apply that? And this is for, Emil or Alex, and our careers generally. If we're thinking not just coming into a law firm, not coming into a company, but you graduate law school and you figure out, what do I want to do? How am I going to be impactful in this world? What are things we can do beyond joining the NBA or the State Bar or other things? What are things we could do?
And now, a word from our sponsors. In these uncertain economic times, the State Bar of Wisconsin wants to make sure that you and your practice have the best available tools. Ultimate Pass and Books Unbound are available for purchase using 6-month installment plans. Contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 for more information. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
Before Alex jumps in, Kristen, I want to talk about this with you, and I think we could go deeper on what we mean by the entrepreneurial attorney.
Yeah.
I remember years ago when we first had that conversation, and I think you were there, I was there, I think our friend Magda Fashaya was there. I can't remember the other lawyers who were sitting around the table, but there were lawyers from different backgrounds, right? You had lawyers who were at firms, you had lawyers who were in-house, you had lawyers who were starting their own shop, and we converged at the idea, and Magda at the time was in the government. And we converged at the idea that being an entrepreneurial lawyer means more than just hanging your own shingle. Mm-hmm. It's a mindset. It's about taking charge of your career and seeing yourself as the lawyer, as the brand, as the company. Like, it's the company of Kristen Hardy and Cole. It's the company of Alex and Cole. And through that, we came to the conclusion that you can be that, at a government, working in the government. You can be that working in-house. You can be that at a larger law firm. You can be that starting your own practice or at a smaller firm. It's almost as if, in the context, and we had that conversation, that there was a lack of agency, because, in terms of how the law is structured and how young lawyers usually wait for things to be handed to them, for things to happen to them. You want to just kind of talk about, I don't know if you remember that day.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation. We talk about this a lot, though. This is a generation, and this is not just lawyers, right? But I think our generation, we're doers. We are not waiting for anyone to give us anything. And Alex, that's a lot of your story, is that, right? Like, you weren't waiting for someone to hand you the big case, or you weren't waiting for someone to ask your thoughts about the new tech. You just said, hey, this is something that we can do, because that's what we do. And I think now more than ever in this current dynamic with the remote work, we talked a lot about that in our last podcast, and then the potential recession, looming recession, and how that is going to impact private practice in particular, but we're seeing it with tech already. You have to do a little bit more than wait your turn. It's not enough to wait. So I think all of us in this room have done a lot of that. We can speak to it individually, but Alex, our guest, I'm interested in your thoughts around that as well, and then just your thoughts generally as like building your brand as an attorney, how you've done that.
Yeah, and I think that is a great point. Like, you got to take the bull by the horns, right? And a lot of people have asked younger students, do you think going to law school is a great career field? And I honestly think it can be great. It's not inherently wonderful. It's not like you're going to go and be a surgeon and come out, make $400,000 a year and be able to help people immediately, like maybe a surgeon. There's far less guarantees going to law school. Like, right. You can come out and, it cannot work out well if indeed you're not willing to take the bull by the horns, right? So there is a lot of opportunity. People still respect and should respect lawyers. In general, I think that certainly with Kristen and Emil, I know you guys do everything in your power to help the community and help those who you love and care for, and help those that need help. So I think, yes, really being able to know what you want and how you're going to or potentially going to do that is big. So just going to law school, not a great idea if you anticipate you're going to come out, land some big job, and you're going in just to make money. It doesn't work out that way entirely, but you do have a lot of freedom and latitude to make it what you want it to be.
When you were in law school, do you feel that your entrepreneurial soul was being fed by that environment? Were there things you learned or didn't learn about being an entrepreneur in law school? I don't want the question to suggest.
It's leading.
It's not leading. It's not leading.
Yeah, honestly, there was.
Okay.
I remember actually an early conversation with you. You got a big law firm job, and I think everyone maybe was envious, or that was the goal at the time. And you came out, and there was an expectation. I started working at a big law firm too. You had realized that maybe that wasn't the path that you...
Oh, they just didn't give me an offer after the summer.
Well, beyond that, though, I know...
They said I wouldn't be a good fit.
Well, and maybe they were right.
That's what they said. Oh, absolutely. In hindsight, I absolutely am very grateful that never happened.
Yeah, and in that big law firm setting, I think maybe it goes to the overall topic that it's very unlikely you would have been given the opportunity to make these grandiose changes, right? And that's what you ultimately have been able to do. And maybe at a smaller firm starting up that I was able to do. You're not going to dynamically change a culture like I know you wanted to do and I wanted to do. And I know, Kristen, you've done so much too. So, yeah, I think that is the beauty of it.
Well, since you called me by name, I think it's important that I know something. We had a not similar, we're in law school at the same time. We probably had different experiences, but convergence was the same thing. Second year, everyone knows, your first semester, you go into these OCIs. I just, at that point in time, didn't have the capacity to think beyond that, because the environment I was in law school told me that this is the path. This is the way. And as a matter of fact, anything other than that, if you think about it, which is a little crazy because only 10% of any class would eventually end up getting either some associateship gig or eventually working in law firms, is like you failed. And so there wasn't even an opportunity or space to think or to take charge of one's career. I would say the moment I came back my 3L year, because it was almost certain, right? You get an OCI, you get a law firm associateship gig, and it's almost guaranteed that you're going to have a job upon graduation. Well, I didn't. I was the only one in my class who had a large law firm gig who did not come back to law school with an offer, at least that I knew of, and it was very demoralizing. That was the first time I had to think for myself. It's the first time I had to think past the path that had been created and handed down as told from orientation day as to what success was.
Yeah.
And I have a similar experience, right? I had the opportunity to work in-house for 2 summers, and I worked for a judge. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I know I didn't want to go into private practice. I would have taken a private practice job if that's all I had, but I knew I really wanted to go in-house. So I've completely carved my own career path. So I resonate with that, Emil, when you say it's the first time you had to really think about what you wanted to do. Because as a 3L, I had to think not only what I want to do, but what I definitely do not want to do. And understanding that, right, some of that is you don't know what you don't know. So I tell students that all the time that I mentor, you should try things out because you don't know what you do or don't like. But if you have these experiences and you don't love them, it may not get any different for you. So maybe you need to think about another path, carving your own path. So that fully resonates with me, as well as the OCI, clerk process. You're doing these interviews, you don't know what you're talking about. It changes person to person. You're trying to connect. And yeah, I don't know if we do a great job. As we're talking, I'm thinking about another friend of mine who went to school with us about a different year, Derek Hawkins, who talks a lot about this. He's an in-house attorney now, but he talks a lot about how, law school did not prepare him to be an entrepreneur. And he's like, I wasn't really thinking about it, but then I wanted to do it, and I didn't really even know where to start because school did not teach me that. And that's it's not just a Wisconsin thing. It's not Wisconsin law school thing, or it's not a Marquette thing. It's really all law schools, how they're set up with they're taught to teach you what they teach you to lean into. And it's usually the firms, like lean into the firms.
So at what point in law school, or was there a defining moment in law school where you had to just sort of break the mold and say, hey, this is Kristen Hardy and company. This is my career. The career is the entity. I'm the entity, and I'm going to start being intentional about what I want to do.
Yeah, I think that's after first year of law school. That's when I felt it. Right then, where I said, I think this is what I want to do. I want to work in-house. And anyone who's ever interned or talked to an in-house attorney, they always say, you cannot go here straight out of law school. That's not how it's going to work. And I said, thank you for the advice, but that's what I want to do. And again, I had a windy road to get there, right? It didn't work out exactly that way. But I was very intentional with, I know I want to go this unconventional path and I want to do it quickly. So I'm going to have to build up everything around me to ensure I can do that. So for me, I always say this, I've done many talks on branding and networking. They sound so cliche, but it's true. You meet the right people, you talk to the right folks, you build your brand appropriately. Figure out what your North Star is, your values, the things that you are not going to budge on, that you need from a company, you need from people, you need to develop professionally, and lean into those things. And for me, the second year of law school, I was the president of BALSA, the Black Law Students Association, which I was not a big talker in law school, if you guys don't remember. I was not out at the bar review with people. I was not there socially. I was going into debt for the first time in school. It's I'm not here to kind of try to make friends all the time, but I thought, I can help people that are like me and I can be impactful. And actually really someone pushed me and said, you should be the president of the BALSA. Why are you not running? Because you always are trying to help people. So that's when I started curating my brand right then, where I thought, and I wasn't saying, I'm trying to curate my brand, right? Mm-hmm. But that's what you were doing. You're like, okay, I like helping Black law students. All right, let me get involved with this. I like this pro bono work. Let me get involved with that. And you start building that. And that's what we continue to do as lawyers, right? But the reason I'm a big doer, I was a big doer in law school. I'm the oldest child. So I was a doer growing up. I was a doer in high school. I was a doer in college. That is my personality. It wasn't until law school when I decided, that is brand building. Mm-hmm. That's who I am. This is, okay, now figure out what you want to do with that.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Want to replay that online seminar you attended the other day but don't have time to be at your desk to watch it? The State Bar of Wisconsin Pinnacle now offers select seminar content in a downloadable MP3 audio format that can be played just about anywhere. So now you can take your State Bar content with you on the go. Check it out today at wisbar.org/seminars. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
Well, and I think that's a great point. Brand building is something that I feel like people don't talk about, or it's looked at almost down upon, that mm-hmm. you have a brand that you are conscientious of mm-hmm. and looking to build. But the reality of it is especially if indeed you meet someone somewhere and you work on a referral network, if you don't have a brand or if you're not identified with something, I can tell you right now, those referrals are never going to come back to you, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really hard already to remember what someone does or what to associate with them. If indeed there's not a brand or something that you know, I'm the work comp guy, and Emil knows that. So if a work comp comes in through the door, he's going to give me a call. And that really has been a wonderful branding mechanism.
Now, Alex, most people don't know this, but you used to be an underwear model at some point in time. So,
Really?
Underwear model's a bit specific. And focus on my underwear model.
I mean, it's one of the first pictures that comes off of you when you Google your name.
This is going to get cut out.
No, it's not. Right? I'm becoming you. It's not some like some sketchy stuff.
Let's tee it up this way. You were a model. You had a different profession before you were in law school.
And in particular, an underwear model. How did that help you? You can complete a question.
Okay. Well,
was that something so compared to other law school students, because I wasn't. I mean, in fact,
I was not.
She was a star, but you were a star athlete. I
was an athlete,
you were an
yes.
athlete. I wasn't an athlete. So on some level, you both came into law school with some idea or understanding of what branding meant.
That's a good point.
So do you think that played a role in how early you were conscientious about your brand and brand you were building?
Yeah, I guess potentially, and I see where that initial comment circles back here. Yeah, I think it does, in fact. And more than that experience in my life was interesting because I was flying around the country, meeting new people, being put in very awkward circumstances where, you probably feel like you don't belong. It's like you get thrown in this situation and all of a sudden you're with people who you perceive to be so much better maybe than you, or you're in a room with a Victoria's Secret model and like professional hockey
player. Better
player.
looking than you.
Yeah, or whatever. I guess, and that's a weird metric, but in modeling that is the metric,
Yeah,
right?
it is, yeah.
So you can feel less than, and still to have to fake it until you make it. And maybe that's the same with law. Like knowing that what the underlying theme is based upon empirical data, and it really, if you have access to statistics or you can break down your practice objectively, I mentioned, cost per case and things like that. Those are all really, really important metrics that I've focused on. I can tell you to the penny what the cost of acquisition per client is on all three different areas of law that we practice.
So how does a first, second year lawyer, because I started my firm 2 years after, and brother, I'll tell you this, I wasn't really concerned with these metrics the way you were, but like, how are you able to lean into those things, understanding that, of course, as an entrepreneur, right, not only do you invest in yourself, you also have to be able to convince people to do, or at least convince them or persuade them to do what you want them to do. And you obviously had a boss at the time who you believed understood and liked empirical data, but that's sort of tasking. Weren't you a little taken aback? Hey, I've been doing this for 2 years. Would people just laugh at me when I talk about cost per acquisition?
I think it is such a manageable concept. And it was like the firm that we were working with for our managing or for our marketing and client acquisition did keep very good data. So we actually would on a bi-monthly basis meet with our marketing person. She would talk about cost per acquisition. And with that, Fred did entrust me and Jim and Lauren with that responsibility to interpret that data. And soon enough, we were interpreting it and realizing that it is the single most important factor. So utilizing it or leveraging it to persuade Fred at the time was very important. But once I actually leaned into it and understood conceptually what it meant, then it's like talking, like this today. You don't have to think, or there's no script to read about. You just know conceptually the idea of what it takes to bring on clients and how to then, convey that to your superior.
That's a good point, though, that you bring up, Emil, about the working for someone first. I think it's so valuable. I think every person, if you didn't play sports or you weren't in something organized where you had a boss, right, like the coach, you had someone, it takes a different level of discipline and just understanding if you're my boss, Emil, and you say, Kristen, I need you to do it in this way, I can disagree with it. I could say, I think it's a better way. And you're like, yeah, but I asked you to do it this way. there's some humility in saying, okay, this is how you need it done, and maybe I'm missing something, so I could learn from you. So did both of you find those things valuable, having worked for someone else, even if it was in law school or after school, where you had that opportunity to work in a firm and learn from someone? And how do you think that has carried you through and made you so successful? What are we, 8 years out? 8 years later?
8.5.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And, I guess this talk makes it seem like immediately we came out and I was entrusted with this responsibility. That's not at all how it was. I was pushing paper for many months or a year prior to any real trust from Attorney Tabek, right? So it wasn't like, looking back on it now 10 years ago, it seems like it all happened quickly, but it really didn't. And it maybe happened a lot quicker than the molasses pace that is associated with large law firm partner track. But it's like any friendship or any hierarchical relationship. There was a level of deference, and still is, to Fred. I think he's a wonderful guy. And but with that, it just, over time, there was a trust that built, that he gave me a little thing and I did decently well at it. And then he gave me another little, slightly bigger thing and I did it decent. And then before you know it, you've done a lot of little things that worked out well enough to be entrusted with a larger responsibility. That's probably the best way to put it for how I did gain his trust. So yeah, I think that's actually exactly how it rolled out.
Yeah, I think that absolutely there was a lot of value in working in organized systems before. So right out of law school, I mean, and this is something up until recently I hadn't felt comfortable talking about, but I think it's important. The more I talk to law school students, I felt the need to share my story about what I went through, and I'm sure there's so many of those stories out there to empower students who are going through OCIs and all of that stuff to understand, hey, it's not the end of the world. Like, there is a world in life that comes after, and for legitimate purposes, you may just not end up in certain situations, right? When I came back from law school, came back 3L year, I wanted to be a litigator. And at the time, I took the "you're not a good fit" comment, which was the last thing said to me when I was told I wasn't going to be offered a job, as I wasn't going to make a good litigator. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that was what the situation is. I look back, think things, in 2020, based on who I was then and who I am now. But at the end of the day, it's what we internalize. That's the most important thing. Right. But I didn't go back and I didn't talk about it. I didn't cry, although I felt that there were some things that I could have said about the situation. I didn't talk to most people about it. I wanted to go back and I wanted to work on myself. One of the first things that I did was I signed up for the most intense litigation workshop that we had at the time, the prosecutor clinic. That's what I did my third year of law school. By the time I graduated law school, I tried about 4 to 5 cases from voir dire to verdict. And again, understanding that, okay, hey, I have to build me as a person, right? So one of the first things I learned about was rejection and how it felt, right? From someone who was responsible for your faith. I get out of law school. I worked with my mentor, my first boss, Ryan Woody, over at Mathieson, Wickett & Lair, a boutique firm. And I am, to this day, Ryan's my mentor, right? I had the very first brief I wrote for Ryan. I'll never forget it. I'm 2 weeks into the job. I write a brief for him on a major case in federal court, and he liked the brief, and he sent it to all the other partners and said, hey, look at the brief Emil just wrote for me. It was awesome. I learned how it feels to be appreciated and how it feels to be empowered, right? Eventually, I left that job. Then I moved downtown I worked at Wilson Elser, Wilson Elser is a larger firm nationally, but they had bought a smaller office in Milwaukee. And it was a great time. I liked it, but I also kind of learned how, I guess I had a more stern boss who, this is my way or the highway, right? And again, most of the advice wasn't bad, but I learned how to take direction, right? And in all of these experiences that I had before starting my own firm, I was able to take in things that I felt I didn't like and made a point to, hey, if I were to start or create an environment, I didn't want to do that, and things that I really, really liked. So one of the things I learned from Ryan, right, is to this day, despite the fact that I do not work for him, if I called Ryan today, he would always get back to me within an hour. He has one of the busiest practices that I know of, right? So if someone that experienced who has that much on their plate can be that for me, I can be that for others. So I think it's invaluable in trying to really draw from within, and these circumstances, draw from within your own entrepreneurial mindsets, your own why. Because when you think about what it takes to be an entrepreneur, you're thinking of yourself and your career as an entity from the jump, right? So it's branding. One of the things I think Kristen's done a great job at is how intentional she is about her associations. And I think you started doing that back in law school.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
You're meant for greater things. But I want to, so Kristen, with you though, like, I don't think I've ever asked you this, the why.
Yeah, the why for...
So we know the debt, obviously, you came to law school, I ain't got time for this, whatever, right? But there has to be a deeper why, because the level of intentionality that you staked on your career very early on is something that I don't think I've seen from a lot of people, and that doesn't come from just nowhere.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Would you like to implement new efficiencies into your law practice but don't know where to begin? Practice 411, the State Bar of Wisconsin's Law Office Management Assistance Program, is the place to start. Don't wait. Contact Practice 411 today for a complimentary and confidential consultation at 1-800-957-4670. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I came to law school because this is kind of how I think about everything in life. I try to think of what I was good at and what I like to do. And I had athletes have a different counselors, right? Everybody in the school has these counselors. We have different counselors. And when I came into school, I wanted to be this is undergrad. I want to be a scientist. That is a very intense, difficult thing for an athlete to do because you miss Friday classes. You're going to miss every single Friday, and those classes are on Friday. So I realized that wasn't going to work out. So I said, all right, let's look at the things I'm doing and things I'm interested in. And that ended up being like a pre-law track. I said, all right, I'm going to go to law school. But I didn't know what I wanted to do in law school. So I said, all right, I'm going to use 3 years to figure out what the heck I want to do. I get the opportunity to work in-house my first summer. And I had some other opportunities, but that's the one that I took. I could have worked at a firm. I could have worked for a judge. I had those offers, but I ended up, and those would have been in Detroit, where I'm from. But in Milwaukee, I had this opportunity to work in-house. And I was like, oh, the business is so interesting. Like, the practice of law is interesting too, but this business component that I didn't know a lot about, I was fascinated by. Your client, it's a different energy when your client sits next to you, literally. It's a different stake, the company winning is me winning, right? Like, we all work here. I always say that to clients, like, we all work here. I don't want to stop you from doing anything. I want you to make the money and make all the good decisions because we all work here. So our success is vested in one another, right? So that's my first year, my first summer, and I went, well, this is what I want to do, all because I just liked it. And that could have been the company, that could have been the business, I don't know, but I really liked it. So my intentionality, my why, is because I thought I liked it. I love the diversity of working for a big company because it's not just the law department, which we know tends not to be very diverse at any company, especially when you're looking at Black attorneys, young attorneys, but it's the company, right? So now you pull in the diversity of an entire group, an entire organization. You go, oh, look at all these people that look like me or don't look like me, and it's interesting. They have interesting stories and backgrounds. I thought that's where I want to be. So everything comes from that first summer job, which I hate how much stake we put in that for law students, but we know how important it is, and it helped change my entire trajectory. That's why I decided that's what I wanted to do. It works with my values.
Thanks. Yeah, that's amazing. Let me ask. Let's switch gears slightly. Do you believe, and any one of you could answer this, that there's something about the culture of being a lawyer or being an attorney that seems to put that career at odds with being an entrepreneur? Are there attributes or traits?
I definitely think there is, especially on the bigger, if you go into a big law firm, you're not taught to think entrepreneurially. That's left up to those who are making the decisions. But on a smaller scale, if you manage if you're a solo practitioner or have just a few employees, you have to be thinking entrepreneurially.
Well, when you say think entrepreneurial, what does that mean for you?
Growth, KPIs, looking at your key performance indexes, managing what that is, having a goal, branding again. So all those things.
So as a younger lawyer, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to drill down. As a younger lawyer who's just getting out of law school, I ain't got no KPIs to be thinking about. So what does being entrepreneurial mean for them or a law school student right now?
Well, I guess to bring it back to what we all said, having a goal, and whatever that goal may be. I know that there are attorneys that just really love the 9 to 5 thing, and they'll come in and they'd like a list, and they do their list, and that's it for the day. And that's perfectly fine. And that, I think we all agree, we need those people, because not everyone can be the chief, right?
Right.
But on the entrepreneurial front, even from the very beginning, if you're kind of contemplating, and maybe summarizes it, contemplating how to make things better or easier for yourself so that you can, in fact, grow. And I think that's really where it came down to. Like I was doing, and I know we have very smart attorneys that work for us now, and I'm sometimes a little, I guess, dumbfounded where we get attenuated enough from that task, and then I go back and look at it, and things that we used to do for maybe good reason or maybe bad reason, the new attorney's still doing it that way. And you come in and you're like, so why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's how it was done. That's never a great sign. That generally indicates you're not really thinking. You're just doing, and that's not great. So being an entrepreneurial mindset from the get-go is, okay, there's a structure. It's in place. Is it the best possible structure that can exist? And if not, how can I change it to make less work for myself? Because that is a great way. If you have the same outcome and less work, that's awesome, because then you can actually be better to your clients.
I want to put a fine point on that just for young law students or young lawyers listening, and then just anyone listening. You had that trust, Alex. Like you built the trust first before you came in and said, because otherwise it can be viewed as arrogance if you're like, hey, this is not the best way to do it. And you're like, that was my system I put in place. I thought it was the best system. Whether that's right or wrong, if you have that trust, you build that relationship, people are more likely to listen to what you have to say. So young law students or young lawyers, trust first, relationship building first, prove that you can do something first. And then when you want to, interject with whatever your changes are, people are more willing to listen to you.
100%. I think that's a great, because I totally agree. If you come in as a new attorney and or a new law student, you think you're going to make these changes, and maybe you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
So you might think you're doing a better change, and it's not realistic. Yeah. So totally agree with you, Kristen.
And I think back to a very specific example. So 7 years ago, I had talked to one of the firms I had worked at about remote work or the ability to be able to work from home, because I was spending an hour, 15 minutes commuting to my work. So about 2.5 hours I was spending on the road. And at the time, right, think about this, like the world has changed a lot. Like I was just, politely told, hey, we just don't do that stuff out here. And I now know that at least half the firm today works remotely. And again, back then I didn't push it, because I'd been in there for 6 months. I wasn't gonna come here and change the way. It demanded that, at a certain point in time I had to either, if it became so crucial or so important to me, maybe kind of figure out a way or an environment where that would be attainable. But you were right though. I think also realizing when you don't have that trust, because as you know, I'm a chatterbox, right? So I just say, whatever comes to my mind, even if I didn't. So I just said it. I said, hey, this is a suggestion. And I think that was another key thing, knowing when you don't have that trust. And it's not like I ever gave up on it. I knew if I had stayed longer or whatever, I could have probably worked my way in. But all right, so we talked about a lot of great things. I want to set up this really this dichotomy of attitudes, right? I'm just going to talk, we'll just name a couple of them in terms of how lawyers versus entrepreneurs view some of these ideas in terms, right? And we may be to flesh out how lawyers currently think today, how that might be antithetical to being an entrepreneur, and how we can sort of bridge the gap. So first is risk. We know that one of the great things that makes entrepreneurs great is their ability to take, the lawyer in me wants to say calculated risk. But just take risk. I represent lots of entrepreneurs. You work for a business, and you know that sometimes the business folks and the law folks don't always see risk the same way, right? True or false, I think lawyers are very risk averse, and they have, most entrepreneurs aren't necessarily as risk averse as lawyers.
True.
I think it's a little more nuanced than that. right? This is my practice for a long time. So, and this is what most lawyers do, right? You have to have a risk assessment. You have to do a risk assessment, right? So lawyers have done the risk assessment. So if you say we're more risk averse, maybe, but we've done the assessment. It's based in fact. Like, we didn't pull it from anywhere. It's like, I am making this calculated risk based on something, whereas some entrepreneurs or some business folks have not done a risk assessment. They're not even looking at it. They're like, that's your job. You tell me. What I'm going to do is, this is how we can make more money. Let's make more money. And I'm going, no. I mean, yes, you could, but the risk of us also being fined with something or having some issue where, I don't know, I used to do anti-bribery work. And it's like, well, that's a bribe, right? Like, so if you do that, I know you could make more money, but the government could view that as a bribe, even though it doesn't feel like that to you. So maybe don't do it. So maybe we're more risk adverse, but I just say the nuance here is we've done an assessment.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Don't mind the dust. We've been remodeling the paralegal certification program here at the State Bar of Wisconsin. New requirements, new CLE options, and new ways to learn, all in a new format. For more information, contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 and ask what the State Bar can do for you. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
No, it serves a point. It serves a very important value, right? But I'm trying to recognize the push and pull, right? So being an entrepreneurial lawyer in itself might not always look like what a true entrepreneur might be, right? At least within our fields.
Sure.
So on the risk side of things, where do you come on that? Like, do you have any comments, Alex?
I like Kristen's assessment better than my initial response. So I think that's the truth of it. And usually, I mean, maybe that's a bit hopeful, but I know that's probably how you operate, and to extrapolate to other people is fair.
Well, I also find that a lot of lawyers suffer from paralysis from analysis.
That's true.
So we love to talk about all the things that will go wrong, how they will go wrong. In my own practice, counseling highly net worth individuals and businesses, is sometimes, my clients will ask me directly, cool, nice 45-minute presentation, what should we do?
Right.
And I find that a lot of lawyers are not as prepared to answer that question, and I get it, because we want to CYA, so we're going to hedge. Well, if I might, you're likely, more blah, blah, blah. And so is that something you guys have faced in your practice as it relates to that risk and what it could do?
It's different for me. I'm going to jump in again because I'm in-house, right? It is not my job to tell you what to do. That's not my job. My job is to give you all the information, give you the risk. And actually, if you tell some business folks, you try to tell them what to do, they'll look at you like, why are you telling me that? I know this business. I understand that. I need you to do this piece of it. Now, you guys in private practice, it may be a little bit different, but I do not view my job as telling anybody what to do. I'm telling you the risk involved. I'm telling you, if you do this is how it happens. If you do that, that's how that's going to happen. But I am not telling you what to do. That's not ever what I want to do as an in-house attorney.
Yeah, and for me, actually, I would say that we are making these decisions regularly, right? To operate a business takes risk, takes big decision making, and that's one of the reasons why I really like having partners. I know myself, Jim, tend to be a little bit big picture, let's go, let's do it, maybe even me more than that. And Lauren's very meticulous, and she would be the one that says, hey, okay, I like the idea, but slow down a little bit. This risk, this is a possibility. Well, how I deal with that is I then can spitball between my partners.
Yeah, and I think I kind of have a little bit of an idea. I counsel folks who by themselves, are an entity. We counsel someone who's he counsels billionaires is a little different, right? And I used to always think that, and eventually when I would get asked, especially with smaller spaces, we have to put on multiple hats. And I will say, and again, I might be talking out of turn, just from experiences, just looking at from outside in. I definitely think that we can maintain our CYA by saying, hey, yeah, I'm going to tell you all this stuff, but if you're asking me directly what I think I would do, based off of XYZ, this is what I would do. You could still do. So it's sort of a way where, it is our job to call out the risks. It's our job to see all the pitfalls and tell you the world's going to end. It's how we're all going to die because we're grim. Like, we're just grim rippers. How many times, Kristen, have you walked into a room, all the business people are happy, they want to go for it, and you just pour some cold water on those flames? right?
I plead the fifth. That's happened.
Well, we all do it a lot, right? But I've come to find that in private practice especially, a lot of lawyers get paid to not actually opine on anything. And we need to just kind of because again, we like this game of like not necessarily being held accountable, right? Because we don't want to ever be on the losing side. The perfect lawyer could craft an argument as to how whatever outcomes were either in line with their advice or not in line with their advice because they never took a damn position in the first place, right? So I think one of the ways we can bridge that gap is for lawyers to be a little bit more specific and actually giving advice and not just lean on the whole paralysis analysis of risk factors. Failure as an attribute. How do you think entrepreneurs view it, and how do our attorneys view failure?
Yeah, and again, Kristen's point earlier, I think that trying things and then having them not work or finding out you don't like them is the best way. So failure is as good. It's a element of success, right? It's very unlikely that people stumble to the exact endpoint where they wanted to be without failure in between, because they don't even know what the endpoint looks like without failure.
Yeah, I think your point, I mean, really, I'm curious your thoughts on this, Emil, because you experienced a failure. I'm doing air quotes for people who can't see me, because you didn't get that offer, right? And then you turned it into something else. So I guess for me, I think in entrepreneurship, you have to fail, to your point. It's part of success. In law, in the practice of law, or if you're in the business of law as an attorney, I think failure could be it's demoralizing, you know. It's so, and I'm not talking about like a case, right? I'm not talking about losing this particular trial. You didn't have a favorable answer or what you wanted. I'm thinking just you don't get that job offer. You get your papers redlined and they're telling you you're probably not a good attorney. I don't think you understand how these transactions work. Who taught you how to draft? This isn't great. Like that feels like a failure. So Emil, how do you view those things? Because you kind of play in both spaces and you've experienced them. So what's your thought there?
So human beings don't like to fail, but I'll tell people who go to law school especially don't like to fail. I mean, think about this, right? For most of us, it was the first time where, you're being graded against someone else. For some people, law school was their first bad grade, I didn't necessarily, law school wasn't my first bad grade experience.
Don't tell people that. Emil's a great attorney. I don't know. He's telling us that.
And generally a very good student.
But anyways, it is. It's a lot. I would say as attorneys, we hedge because we don't want to fail, which is very different too from entrepreneurs. Like you said, the average entrepreneur asks himself, okay, so I failed, let's try something new. And I think the fear of failure, you can see it in every aspect of the legal system, from how law schools are and how they most wouldn't experiment with new things, to how our judicial system operates, to how slow it is for any laws. Lots of laws that we know would be great for them to change and it's always like, okay, what if it works? Everyone talks about hey, this is what we have, and this, even when you admit and that things or systems aren't working, in the legal profession, we are adamant. So, for example, take the billable hour, for example. Everyone knows that on some level there's something broken about this, right? But it's like, we're not changing it. Like, why are we going to change that? Or the idea or the primacy of for example, I'm not saying law reviews are not important. They are, but they're important for a different reason. I don't think it gets emphasized as much. It's important because first, you get to actually sit down with shit you don't like and actually have to painstakingly go through it. But that stature, but honestly, if you've been in moot court or whatever, or you can cite a comma, how many times I've been asked about that in my brief? None. And I've written all the way to the Supreme Court. But that's the way. Yeah. We don't even think about what's working, because we don't want to fail, because anything else that doesn't breed what we're used to is seen as a failure. So I've been at every point in time, every time that I failed and I've experienced a failure, I've been able to sort of just use that as part of the story or use that as part of the feel, and understanding that failure leads you to diversion. Like, honestly, I think it was important for me to go through that experience. I will never forget, after OCIs, I had 2 offers from 2 of the largest firms. And I remember not picking one of the firms because they took 2 days too long to get back to me. And the other ones they just wanted me. Like, and then in hindsight, you think back about how, but for the fact that I didn't get an offer, I never would have thought about, well, hey, like they actually kind of cared a little bit more, but I wasn't seeing that because of my ego. So failure is actually the only time you get to sit down and actually reflect. It's hard. We win a lot. I'm sure you win a life a lot. You win a life a lot. There are very few times where in the midst of your victory, you're like, let's review how I could have won more or better.
Let me say this, like thinking about, again, we were talking earlier about me being an athlete, like that's when you learn how to fail, right? Especially track. I ran track. That is it's no one else's fault, right? You can't say you didn't get down the court fast enough or, you didn't spike the ball right in this. No, it's me. It's all Kristen. So I learned how to lose gracefully, right? Because I won a lot, surely. I got a scholarship to run in school. Like I won a lot. But I lost a lot too, and especially in college. I was losing plenty, and that was fine because I learned how to be it's something to be said to be about a graceful loser. And it's a lot of humility there, and it's a lot of reflection there where you're like, okay, how can I get better? I didn't do good this time. How can I do better? What can I improve upon? And that's what we're called to do. But you're right, the law system, the way it's currently set up, it's not always great for allowing for failures.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Are you struggling with work-life balance issues? Could you use some help addressing these challenges? WISLAP offers confidential well-being support to lawyers, judges, and law students. With trained peer volunteers, structured well-being resources, and individualized support services, WISLAP aims to foster work-life balance within the Wisconsin legal community. Find us on the web at wisbar.org/WISLAP. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Yeah, they don't teach us how to fail too, because if you think about even how litigation works, like there's a versus, like someone will lose, like someone's going to get that. I think they should pay more attention in law school about the people who are going to get the B minuses and the C, because someone will get it. Like no matter how good you are, right? And what do we do with those people? How do we teach them? Because we know lots of people in our class, or some people in our class who didn't take the first semester and second semester of law school very well, and may have actually impacted or affected how they view themselves as lawyers or as law school students. So I think on the entrepreneurial side, failure is an opportunity. Within the legal side of things, failure is damning and almost something that shouldn't be experienced at all. So I guess it's another difference. So thinking as an entrepreneur, lose more gracefully.
Lose gracefully.
Lose gracefully, all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Gracefully.
Opportunity, or at least choices. I think that's something entrepreneurs welcome, and they are not scared of it. I do find that some lawyers, and the way we're taught, we almost get paralyzed in the face of too many choices as it relates to careers as well, right? Is that something that you think, because everything in law school seems to, in your first couple of years, seems to be telling you need to know exactly what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life come day 2, otherwise you're screwed.
It's just unrealistic. I guess I never grasped on that concept ever. Like, you still don't know what you're doing when you're doing it.
It's so true.
That's the line right there.
Yeah, I never thought that I needed to have something solidified, and maybe that was a strong suit of mine. So it's just not realistic.
Yeah, and I also think the beauty of the legal profession, at least for me, like the beauty of the JD is that you have a lot of options. Have you ever met an attorney? It's like a corny thing they say, like, oh, I've been practicing for 20 years. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I resonate with that because you can reinvent yourself so much in this profession. So how should we be looking at opportunity the same way as entrepreneurs do? Like, it's those choices are important. And it also makes you know you can pivot, right? If I always know, okay, I don't like doing this anymore, I can pivot. I don't like this place anymore, I can pivot. It gives you confidence. And it's true. It's a fact. You really can. So I think if we tell young attorneys, young lawyers that a lot more often, I try to do that with everyone I mentor. You are not stuck. You can pivot. I know you have to you feel like you need litigation or transactional work. Which one am I going to do? And then you decide from there. But you can always pivot and do something else if you have the right people, if you've built the trust at the right firm, if you've made the right connections, you've done the right branding. Opportunity is a gift. That choice is a gift. So use it. So I want to see that more from law students. I want the law schools to teach more of that. And I know you're an adjunct. I was an adjunct before, Emil. I said that to my students a lot. I'm sure you probably say some version of that because you continue to reinvent yourself as much as you like.
And going back to a discussion we were having earlier, I think there are several classes I took in law school that did prepare me for managing or being part of a law firm. LaFollette at Crump had a class that I took called Starting and Managing a Law Firm. And it was actually very practical. If any complaint of law school was that it was abstract, right? It was like this idea that learning was not quite graspable. And with the way Professor Crump taught the class was very, very tangible. It was step by step, how to get your law firm up and running, how to read profit and loss statements, how to get your LLC going, like things that were actually manageable. And I found that to be very beneficial. I don't know if either of you took that class.
No.
It was a good one because it was the one class that got away from kind of what we were saying of that abstract, not teaching how to do these things in law school.
Yeah, and we'll just end with a couple of more traits. Change. How entrepreneurs view change versus how lawyers traditionally view change.
I'm going to weigh in on this one first because it's scary. Like, I'm talking from the lawyer standpoint. For change as an entrepreneur could be great because you have the startup, it doesn't go well, but you thought of something new related to the startup, and now you're going to do it better. Change for attorneys, I talked about, being able to pivot. That's a gift. Opportunity is a gift, but it's still scary. I changed my practice in the last year and a half, so I feel like a green lawyer, which that's a lot, right? It makes you, if you've been practicing for a long time doing the same thing and you were practically an expert in or you were an expert in what you were doing, and then you do something different, that change is scary. So I think lots of lawyers will spin and do the same thing, whether they like it or not, because they're too afraid of that change and not being the expert, not being the chief, not being the partner, not being the go-to. Even you look at partners who go in-house. If their identity is wrapped up in being a partner, they may never want to come and be assistant general counsel next to Kristen, who's never a partner, right? And we're doing similar work. They may not want to do that. So I think change is scary for attorneys, and I don't know if that's ever going to change. It's scary for all people, but especially for attorneys.
There is this idea about people's identities, because so much about being an entrepreneur is, at least from the base level as an attorney, is about your brand and your identity. Younger lawyers especially fall into this proclivity to want to associate who they are very early on,
Yes.
where they work or what they do.
Yep.
How many times have you been, you remember those events, you walk in and you're like, what's your name? Hi, my name's Alex Eichhorn and I work for Foley. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, I know Foley, man. Sounds like a dope dude back in the day. Who the hell is you?
Right.
Like what is your brand? Who are you? And it is. I don't think that there's anything wrong in that, but like this idea that where you work is sort of the totality of who you are or what you do. Do you see that as an issue? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's 100% how it went down, right? Like, if I worked for Foley, I would have said, "Hey, I'm Alex Eichhorn. I work for Foley." I didn't work for Foley, but it's just.
So now you're just a hater.
No, I don't hate at all. That's great, and I know a lot of people that work there that are happy. But yeah, I guess it's an issue more broad spread than just being an attorney, right? Like that's the way a lot of conversations unfortunately go. Is like, hey, what do you do? Sometimes it feels like when the first question someone asks you is like, what do you do? It's like, well, am I valuable enough to speak with you is kind of the question I always get. I'm never a huge fan of it right out of the gates. So yeah, I would say it is a weird way to start.
Do you know Mark Camelli? So I was so impressed for a very long time. When I met Mark Camelli in law school, it took me a couple of times before I actually realized he worked there. He was even a lawyer.
Partner.
He was a partner.
Yeah.
And I was just like, and not just like any partner. This is like some legit dude. Yeah. And like litigation, and because his daughter was a year above us and all that stuff. And Mark's a partner at Reinhardt, and I remember I'm like, I kind of want to be that guy. Like he just had so much personality, and I was so engrossed in who he was and what he had shown me that I didn't. It was cool later when I realized where he worked at, what he did, but it wasn't engrossed in his identity.
He's person 4, right? And Mark Camelli is one of my favorite humans in Milwaukee. We share a love of food, so we like to always, eat in fellowship, and we talk about work, like maybe this much, but mostly we're talking about food and interesting things and cultural things that are happening in the world. But we talked about this before, Emil, about the danger of, we talk about the branding piece, but then the danger of young attorneys trying to do it all. Like they want to be identified as not only I work at this company, but also I'm the leader here and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And I always say, like, learn how to practice law. Like, can we slow down and learn how to practice law before we do all the things? It can't be everything all at once, because then you look like you're not a master of anything, right? Because you're wasting too much time. So I do think it's dangerous that we have to, but I get it. That's what the profession teaches us to do. You have to lead with, I am, Emil, and I have my own firm. Like, this is my firm, this consulting group. Like, you have to almost, especially put that diversity piece in it, right? When you're young, when you're a person of color, when you're a woman, where you're like, I have to let you know who I am in this scenario, right? Like, yes, I'm an attorney, but I'm an attorney here. So
legitimizing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm demanding respect. Make sure you respect me. That's what we're saying, right? Because we feel like we may not be getting that. So it's damaging, but it's also par for the course, right? It's part of the profession.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Can't find the time to attend a seminar, but want the course materials as a reference? State Bar Wisconsin Pinnacle now offers PDF downloads of most seminar materials. Check it out today at wisbar.org/seminars. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
It also kind of helps you offshore that agency and push that offer early on. So many people are like, I'll wait for my marketing department to do this. And it's almost like, I'll wait for you to tell me what I am or who I am. Mm-hmm. And so at my firm, one of the things when I decided, when it got to a point where we started bringing people on, I always wanted an environment where people could come find themselves. And that means that sometimes themselves might not be there. So shout out to my former colleague, Andrew Martzall. Andrew was with us while he was in law school. Towards the end of his stint as a law clerk, we gave him an offer. Andrew was amazing. He was killing it in litigation. But we talked about it. We talked about his love for estate planning. And I told him, I said, hey, man, like, if that's what gets you going, like, I introduced him to every estate planning lawyer I knew. I'm like, I just don't do estate planning work. And I barely made it to my trust and estates class. Sorry. But I'm like, I want the thing that gets you up in the morning. Andrew found that. He also wanted to be closer up north, so he moved back to Green Bay. Now works in Michael Best at the estate planning. And I remember when Andrew came to my office to tell me he was leaving, and he was very sad. It was like almost crying, and I was sad, but I was so happy for him because I knew this was someone who was taking his time intentionally to go find what his fit was. Because at the end of the day, that's, for me, entrepreneurship comes down to one thing, or thinking as a lawyer, being intentional. It's crazy, and we can end on this piece, but it's crazy how many people don't realize what can be achieved the moment they choose to be intentional about anything. Whatever, be intentional about where you want to end up at, what you want to do, what you don't want to do, where you see yourself. And it's not just one thing to think about it, but actually thinking about it, putting it out in the universe, and working to achieve it. And I don't believe in faking it until you're making it. I believe in working hard enough to making it, and then, you can talk about it. Because like entrepreneurs do, and when most, if you look at it in startup, there is a grind phase. Mm-hmm. There's a grind phase every career, and there's a grind phase while you're grinding, you just can't be docile, right? You should also be looking at, I'm sure there are people, Kristen, who you looked up to, and people I looked up to. I'm like, hey, from afar, like, I like the way they do. I like the way they put themselves together. I like what they stand for. I love what they represent, and I want to be that, right? You're taking notes. I would have sounded like a clown in the first 2 years. I'm like, hey, you know what? So I just started my firm, and let me tell you everything. And it's like, this is crap. I mean, I'm still kind of used to this stuff. So I think that there is a gap. Younger lawyers, and any lawyer, I believe, can be entrepreneurial. They should be entrepreneurial, because our entire profession might depend on it. Might depend on these attributes being infused, the ideas of change, the ideas of trying out new things, the ideas of not running away from failure, the idea of actually taking charge and being intentional in how we live our lives and how we live out our profession.
I want to add a piece to that intentionality. I think, and this is for lawyers and non-lawyers alike, you have to know who you are and what you want and what you stand for. I talked earlier about knowing my North Star, knowing my values, or have an idea anyway of what I did and did not want, or what I could or could not stomach. And I think if everyone took a little bit more time to really look beyond what this profession tells you're supposed to want, what school tells you you're supposed to want, your family, your friends, your colleagues, and think about what you truly want, we would be better off. I have a colleague, not a lawyer, Regina, shout out to Regina, and whenever we do these introductions at work, she always says like, well, this is the thing I do, but that's not who I am. So let me tell you who I am. And every time she does it, we're all captivated because it changes a little bit each time. But it's like, yes, I know so much about her. Her job is important and we need the work that she does. Excellent. But I know her as a human being, and that informs everything that she does and that intentionality. So I really want students and young lawyers to stop and think about what you really want and having the courage to live whatever that is, because we would get all so much further in life and be a lot more happy if we did that.
That's a great point. I love that, Kristen.
I love it. I think that's where we leave it at. Hey, Alex, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And also, Alex just had a baby, so thanks for giving us some of your time.
Thank you. Yes, Eleanor, 3 months old yesterday, so just a beauty, and it's definitely a different stage in life.
How's work-life balance going?
What does that mean?
There we go.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele, and we'll catch you next time.